It's great to be here in Lisbon. Thank you, Bruno, for inviting me to speak before you. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks, Lisa, for that great talk. I really enjoyed it. So I'm super thrilled to be here. Let's see if we can get my slides up on the screen. There we go. So here I am. I thought it was important, especially for the people in the back, for you all to see what I look like. More importantly on this slide, these are the hashtags that you can use today if you're tweeting. Obviously, the conference hashtag is UXLx. You will often find me tweeting under LeanUX, the hashtag, in part because I wrote a book about that subject with my business partner, Jeff Gothelf. And I actually want to start by talking a little bit about hashtags.
Hey, Justin, what's up?
Not much, Jimmy. Hashtag chillin'. What's up with you?
Just been busy working. Hashtag rise and grind. Hashtag is it Friday yet?
Hey, check it out. I brought you some cookies. Hashtag homemade. Hashtag oatmeal raisin. Hashtag show me the cookie.
Sweet. Hashtag don't mind if I don't. Pretty good. Hashtag getting my cookie on. Hashtag I'm the real cookie monster. Hashtag no.
Delicious, right?
Yeah.
Hashtag I did it all for the cookie. Hashtag LOL.
Hashtag classic. But
All right. So how did we get here? It's 2015, and we all have probably used and certainly read hashtags. We've got Jimmy Fallon doing multiple skits on hashtags. Well, it turns out that if you go back and you look, it was 2007 when a Twitter user named Chris Messina first proposed using hashtags on Twitter. So this was not a feature of the system. This was a feature that was proposed as part of the conversation that was taking place on Twitter. So that was 2007, so that was just about 8 years ago. But it did not become it was not an officially supported feature of Twitter for another couple of years. It took 2 years for Twitter to actually build support into the system for the hashtag. And what they did, an engineer added a simple feature where anytime a hashtag appeared, it was a hyperlink, and if you clicked on that hyperlink, it took you to a search page. And it showed you all of the tweets that used that hashtag. And that's something that we assume is a kind of a built-in part of Twitter now, but it was not a planned feature. And it's actually a feature that's very popular, very useful, and Twitter makes a lot of money selling ads against hashtags right now. So what I want to talk about is the way that social systems, right, and Twitter is a social system, right? Social systems have this interesting property in that these conversations take place on them, both real and metaphorical conversations. And from those conversations, behaviors emerge. They have this interesting property where unplanned things happen in the system. And from those unplanned things, we, as a group of designers, have the ability to create features. So this idea of emergence is really, really important to our work. And it's a really different thing from the way many of us started our work, right? And it's not built into our models for how we work. So when I started this work in the early 90s, the way we talked about our work came from the sort of early work in human-computer interaction. Right? That's what we called the field then. And the idea was that you had a user, right, and you had a computer, and we were designing the interaction between those two things, right? And we were designing these sort of discrete systems. We were designing productivity systems, word processing systems, and drawing systems, and things where they could be complicated. They could be things like Photoshop, right? But they were somewhat predictable. There was no conversation with other people happening. And now what we're seeing is the emergence of a new kind of system that many of us are working on, and that's becoming kind of the dominant type of system that we work in. These conversations, these systems where humans are having conversations with other humans through the mediating influence of the products and systems that we are designing. Okay? And that's a really, really different thing. And our process model from the early days that we've inherited from the early days, that we've inherited from a world of supply chain management where things flowed discretely through a manufacturing process, and we knew what was going to happen. A laptop was going to come out on the other side, right? It's really different now when we don't know what's going to come out on the other side. There's a third element in this model. Whoops, did I skip a? Yeah, I skipped a slide. That's okay. So, so the other thing that's interesting here is it's not just people talking to other people in sort of our Twitter model, but we've also got this situation where people are having conversations with the sponsoring organization that's hosting the system. So this is an ad that ran in the US in December. This is an ad for Weight Watchers, which is a very popular business in the US because we all in the US need to lose weight. I don't know how familiar you are with this brand in Europe, but this is an ad where this is a service that people subscribe to. They pay a monthly fee, and the service helps them manage their diet. So I just want to show you this ad quickly.
Everyone knows Weight Watchers works, and this is a whole new way to do it.
You can pull out your phone and just say, help.
24/7 expert chat is click to chat.
I am a coach. I am real. I am there answering your chats. You can do it completely online. If you wake up hungry, if you show up at the office and there's donuts and you weren't expecting them, coaches are literally a click away.
I've been there, I've lost the weight, and I can help you do it too.
The all-new Weight Watchers. Join for free, 1 month free.
So I love when she says, I'm a coach, I'm real, right? Because this is what we're doing. We're connecting real people to one another, even if it's on behalf of brands and organizations. This is the slide that I skipped. See, that's a brand and an organization down there. So what's happening here is we're designing these systems, whether we're connecting people to each other or to brands or both, where people are having a conversation in the system. So I just want to see a quick show of hands. How many folks here are Facebook users? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you. Now raise your other hand if you're a Twitter user. Okay. So think for a moment about why you use one system for, okay. What about Snapchat? Okay. Think for a moment about why you use one system versus another. It's probably because there's different people that you talk to on Twitter than on Facebook, right? This is on the left here is a social network called Ello, which launched in the US last year. Ello is a Facebook competitor. Their value proposition is we are a Facebook that respects your privacy. We're a Facebook without ads. And on the right, obviously, this is Facebook. And the thing that's really important here is that if let's say tomorrow you set out to create a Facebook competitor, it would be a relatively straightforward problem for you to solve to just copy all of Facebook's features. They're all there. You can see what they do. You can see how they behave. You could code them up. It'd be a lot of work, but you could do it. It's not complicated. That's sort of what Ello is doing. But that alone doesn't get you a Facebook competitor, right? Because what's really interesting about Facebook is not the way the features work, but the conversation that's happening there. Okay? So what do we do then when our job as designers, as product people, is built around this idea of designing, creating, and delivering features, right? Our whole process is about features. But the thing we're trying to do is to create a conversation. Right? How do we approach that problem? And so I want to take you through a case study of a project that we did at my studio last year, in which this was the problem. We were trying to create a conversation among a group of people online. I want to talk to you about how we did that. And hopefully that'll provide some answers to that question. So I'm going to start by sharing with you the brief, what our client came to us with asking for, talk to you a little bit about how we approached the work, and then a couple of closing thoughts about it. So here's the brief. The client that we worked for was a client called Taproot Foundation. This is a nonprofit organization in the US. Taproot Foundation's business is to get people to donate their professional time to nonprofit organizations, right? So that's what they call pro bono service. In the US, law firms donate 10% of their hours for good causes, but most of our other professions don't have that same model. Designers, marketers, management consultants mostly don't have an industry-wide model for donating their professional time. So Taproot's business is to get people to donate their professional time. They've been doing this for 10 years, and they've been doing it in an offline way. So organizations write a grant, and then they're granted volunteers that Taproot finds for them. They've been doing about 300 projects a year, and they came to us and they said, we want to grow, we want to scale our impact, we want to go from 300 projects a year to 30,000 projects a year. And we think the only way to do that is to create an online marketplace for pro bono, right? And the way that would work, we would have a volunteer who might want to give her time. We would have a nonprofit organization who needs a volunteer service. And we're going to create this kind of online marketplace, and we will host that online marketplace, right? So look familiar to you, right? It's this kind of social system in which what we're trying to do is create this conversation. And we said, great, this is awesome. We love this idea. How does the system, what are the features of the system? And how many of you folks work as consulting, in the consulting side of the industry? Okay. How many of you work in-house? How many of you have seen giant requirements documents? Right, should be the whole room, right? So you know, right, that typically at the start of a project, you come in, somebody drops this binder on the table and says, build this. And so good news and bad news, this client didn't have one of those binders. They said, we don't know, which was actually, it's very liberating. It's the kind of thing you hope for when you start a design project, because you get to kind of go back to the beginning. And so we sat down with the client and we said, okay, instead of starting with requirements, let's just start with our project goals. And we had some very, very sketchy functional goals, right? It was really just that the two parties should be able to discover each other, they should have a conversation about the work, they should agree to meet each other, and then they should agree to work together. Sometimes we joke that this was a dating service for volunteers. It's Tinder for nonprofits. But more importantly, we said, well, how will we know if we've succeeded? And working with the client, we focused on the outcomes that we were trying to create, which was, in the beginning, simply that service seekers and service providers would be able to find each other and do more projects than do projects at a higher rate than was currently happening offline. So that was our bar. It was really just it was not which features will you build, it's let's be more effective than the current service. And so with that in mind, we set out again asking the age-old question, what features do we build? Because we're designers, and most of us were at User Experience Lisbon, right? We're user-centered designers, and so we think about what features does the user need. And we laid out a project plan to address this question. This is a really typical consulting project timeline. We said, well, we're going to spend the first 8 weeks of the project doing research, figuring out what the user needs, and then we'll spend the second part of the project, a little more time, in production actually building. One of the important things here is that we had a deadline about 20 weeks out for a big bang publicity event and launch at a national conference. So we had 20 weeks and we divided the time. Some of you may notice that there's no design phase in here. As designers, that may rankle you, but we're going to talk about that we're going to come back to that from an agile point of view. Our shop is an agile shop, so we'll talk about how that works. Anyway, so this is a pretty typical consulting timeline, and we started working this way. And after a couple of weeks, we discovered that the client had a really clear sense of the business process that they were trying to create, that they were trying to support online. As I said, they've been doing this for 10 years. They kind of knew what worked in the offline world. The question was, what did we need, what would work as we translated this to the online world? And what we realized was we couldn't figure that out by trailing the offline world. And we couldn't figure that out by drawing wireframes and designing features. The only way we could figure out what would work was to actually launch the service, right? To take a page from the sort of service design playbook and sort of do service prototyping, right? And so what we did was we went to the client and we said, you know, this timeline here, we got it wrong. And we're going to change things, and what we want to do is we actually want to go live next week, right? And the client had a little bit of a freak out. But we explained to them, they were very trusting, and they agreed to do this. And the thing we wanted to do, and this is the first thing that I want you to take away from this, is that in social systems, the way to get started is to start the conversation, okay? So what we realized we needed to do was to start the conversation early, okay? When you go to a party, and you've had a good experience at the party, you don't go home the next day and say, man, I went to this party and the couch was amazing, right? You say, I met this amazing person and we had this incredible conversation. And so this is what we needed to do. We needed to start the conversation. And a good party relies on a great host, okay? So the thing that was critical for us in this whole mix was having a great host behind the scenes, right? In starting this conversation, you often hear in the lean startup world, which I spend a great deal of time in the sort of lean startup world, you hear about this idea of the Wizard of Oz system, right? Or the minimum viable product. In our case, we launched a system in which most of the heavy lifting was done behind the scenes by a community manager, right? So our team working on this product was a designer, a developer, or designers, developers, product managers, and community managers. And that was the sort of critical enabling capability that lets you start that conversation early. We had people who knew this community of nonprofits, knew the community of volunteers, and were able to get them talking. And so we said, well, what's the smallest bit of digital technology we need to enable the community manager to start the conversation? And what we realized was we needed essentially two web pages. We needed a site with an index page that listed all of the projects, right? The projects are the things that the nonprofit organizations need done. And then off of this index page, we needed a detail page that described the project. And so the way this minimum viable product worked is that our community manager got on the phone, and she called about a dozen nonprofits, and she found about a dozen projects to do, and she wrote down all the details. And then we hand-built about a dozen web pages, one for each one of the projects. We made it look like it was a real website, but it was just hand-built, static website. And then the community manager emailed all of the volunteers. And again, we used a kind of a form email that made it look like a system was sending email to the volunteers. And the email said, hey, check out this great new service we've launched. Go to the index page and volunteer. And so anybody who clicked on the link got to the index page. They might see a project that was interesting to them. They might click on that project. They'd click into the detail. And if they were interested, they'd click on the Let's Talk button, and they would get a form. The form looked like it was submitting a form to the database, but it wasn't really. It was just sending an email to the community manager. And what the community manager would do when she got the email was she would enter it into our database. And so the database was just a Trello board that we used to track the interactions. And so what would then happen is we would arrange for these meetings with the nonprofit and the volunteer, and we would sit in on them and we would listen. So we were able to watch this process unfold during the research phase, so that by the time we got to the build phase, to the start of the production phase, we'd actually been through the business process a number of times. We had real learnings about how that process worked, about what features we needed to support the process, right? And we had metrics in the system. We had a sales funnel from the number of projects at the top down to the number of project matches. This is the real, this is our actual dashboard. We spend a lot of money on our dashboards. This is our real dashboard from the project. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, this was on the day that we kicked off production. So this is a very impressive thing, and this is the kind of thing that it rewards your clients who take a chance on you. You say, we're going to launch before we're ready. And then when you get to the moment where you say, well, this is when we were planning to launch, and look, we've got this evidence now. We've got a live system. It might be very primitive, but we've got a live system that's generating learning for us. So this is the dashboard that's been updated. This was about halfway through the production phase. And I want to show you a couple things that I think are really interesting about this dashboard. The first is that the top and the bottom of the sales of the funnel are the same, right? It's the same metric, we just have more, the numbers are higher. But the things we're measuring in the middle of the funnel are different. Because as we're able to run this business process, we're able to learn what actually moves the needle, what actually makes a difference in this process, right? And what are the key, the KPIs, the key performance indicators that we need to watch? What are the outcomes that we need to create along the way? So this is the kind of thing that if you were just building for 20 weeks without ever launching, you'd never know. That the sort of things you planned and thought were important when you started the project turn out to not work, but then there are these other things that actually are important. So that's the second learning that I want to talk about, which is that when you're working this way, it's really, really important to track the outcomes that you're creating by building the system, rather than the features that you're building. If you've ever worked in an agile project, you probably recognize this chart on the left. This is called a burn down chart. And it's a way of measuring your progress, how many features you're building over time, and predicting when you're done, right? By the time we get to this point on the graph, we'll have built all of our features. But actually, it doesn't matter whether you've built the features. No one cares about the features. What's important is, are you creating the outcomes that your client is paying you for, or that your stakeholders are asking you for, right? Are you getting projects in the funnel? Are you making those projects attractive to people so that they'll click on them? Right? Are conversations happening? And are people agreeing to work with each other? Those are the outcomes you're trying to create, not have you built the scheduling system. Right? Sometimes when we talk about this kind of outcome tracking, one of the things that people worry about, especially in the design community, is that all we're tracking are numbers, right? That we're just sort of A/B testing our way to some beautiful future. But I think the other thing that's really important to track, right, that you're running this business process, you're watching people work, there's also a lot of qualitative feedback that's coming in. In some ways, in the early stages, you're getting more qualitative feedback than you are getting quantitative feedback. And so, for example, we were getting feedback like this: I'd love to post more projects on the marketplace. We're thrilled, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Right? So you can make most people do most things once. The question is, will they come back and do it a second time, right? And so it's really important when you're tracking outcomes to understand what are the qualitative outcomes you're seeking to create in addition to the quantitative outcomes. And that leads me to the next point. Some of you may have looked at this page when I showed it to you earlier and thought, that's not a good-looking page. And I think that was a conscious decision by the project team, which was to not spend a lot of time on making great graphic design in the early phase of the project. We weren't sure that any of this system was going to work. We didn't want to invest a lot in making it look beautiful. We needed it to work. And we also needed to understand who we were talking to and what they valued. So it wasn't until about halfway through the production phase that we began actually working on brand and graphic design. And so we were able to then sort of, once we had some confidence in the basic structure of the site and in the kind of importance of which messages were important to convey, we were then able to pull in the brand work and the graphic design work to start making the experience feel higher quality, okay? Oops. So I said earlier that some of you may have noticed that there was no design phase in the project plan. And that's because we think of sort of the way we approach this thing is that design is a continuous activity through the whole program, right? That there's no moment where you start design and then there's no moment when you stop design. You just are designing different things at different points in the process. In the early phases, that research phase, a lot of what I think about is designing experiments, okay, rather than designing features or designing functionality. It's how are we going to design the experiments that let us learn what we need to learn? If you come to my workshop tomorrow morning, we'll talk more about designing experiments. But so design is not a discrete phase during the project, it's an ongoing activity. And in fact, that really applies to all digital product development, right? That we need to rethink the way we approach product development, stop thinking about discrete projects, and start thinking about ongoing programs, right? So when Lisa asked, you know, can we approach the sort of, and I'm going to mangle your question, but can we approach information workflows the same way we approach the supply chain? And she said no, and I'm glad she said no because I agree with that position, right? That we're no longer manufacturing software, right? We're not done in 12 weeks, right? We think of buying software, we think of software procurement as if we're going to go to the store, we're going to buy this discrete package of Office or Word or Microsoft Windows, we're going to take the disks home, we're going to install them in our server or our computer, and we're done, right? But that's not how software is made these days. There is no manufacturing step, right? Instead, when you go to buy software now, right, this is a package of Microsoft Office you could buy in the US right now. What you're actually buying is a product key. You're downloading the software from the internet. And you're downloading the latest version because at Microsoft, the production doesn't stop, right? With software, production doesn't stop. And so on this project, this was a 20-week-long program. When we were done, we didn't walk away from a finished system. We walked away from the beginnings of a system, and we had to hand it over to the client. We said, congratulations, now you have a baby. And this baby is messy, and you're going to need a product manager, and you're going to need a designer, and you're going to need a community manager. And actually, that happened over the life of this program. Their people worked with our people, and by the end of the program, or our involvement in the program, their people were doing most of the work, right? Because we transitioned ownership to them. And so this has some deep implications for the way we think about our work and the way we structure our engagements, if you will. If you're in the consulting world, which I am, it means that you need to think about your contracts, okay? The typical consulting contract, you are paid a fee, and in exchange, you return a deliverable. And there's typically a great deal of negotiation at the beginning of the project about what's going to be in that deliverable. You're going to give me a system, it's going to have the following features, et cetera. But if you don't know what those features are at the beginning, how can you sign up for those? So our contract model needs to change. And that's one of the battles I've been fighting for the last couple of years with our clients' procurement departments, is helping them shift their thinking about what it is they're buying and how to write a contract that's fair for both sides, that's focused on delivering outcomes rather than deliverables. And this applies in-house as well. If you're an in-house team, instead of contracts, though, it's about your conversation with your stakeholders, right? When you say, well, we're going to move this number, where this number is at 15%, and at the end of the quarter, the number is going to be at 50%, right? We don't know what features we're going to build to move that number, but you can't sign up with your stakeholders to build features if you don't know what features you're building, right? So you have to restructure that conversation with your stakeholders. And finally, as I said, you're not buying a box of software, you're having a software baby, right? So this is a 20-year program at least. I've got a 20-year-old as well, so I can't imagine beyond that horizon. Right, so you're not done, right? You've just launched this thing that is going to continue to live. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about this morning, okay? That when we're thinking about creating social systems, systems in which people are having a conversation, there are at least a couple of important ways that we need to think about restructuring our work. The first is start that conversation early. The second, fund outcomes, not features. Okay? And the third is think programs that continue rather than discrete projects. If you'd like to see the site, it is live at, at taprootplus.org. I think at the moment they're only matching volunteers in the US, but I think the plan is to go more broad shortly. But anyway, you can take a look at the site and see what's there. It's at taprootplus.org. They're a great organization. And I am at Seiden on Twitter. My book is in the lobby. That's a guy who's dancing, and I'm happy to take questions. Okay? Thank you all so much. I had a great time.